right, it is the top of the hour, so we are going to get started with today's webinar, Considerations for Physical Records Management in Warehouses. We appreciate you joining today, and the first thing I always like to do is just take a second and introduce today's speakers. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimel, and I'm joined by our key speaker today, Solutions Architect Tim Butler. Now, before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. All answers are anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. All right, to kick things off, I have a few slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimel and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimel is an information governance software company that was founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that help balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimel can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration, file analysis, electronic and physical records management, document management for SAP. And for those who are not new to our webinars, you might notice a slight name change. They are the same products, just with a more convenient name. We are also very excited about one of our most recent news of our acquisition of Sherpa Software earlier, well, I guess now it was last month, which adds an e-discovery and data governance capability to our Gimel Discover product. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Tim so he can get started with today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Shana. Appreciate that. And as always, guys, Shana referenced it already, but welcome to another edition of Gimel webinars. We're grateful that you're here and willing to spend a few minutes of your busy day with us. As always, we invite you, as Shana referenced there again, please drop any questions into the Q&A or the chat feature of the webinar, and as time allows, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. Guys, I do want to kind of give credit where credit is due right up front. I've actually been at this physical records management thing now for a couple of decades. And a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you today, I've learned it from our clients, right? I've always been in the role of vendor. I see things from that perspective. I've never been on the practitioner side. And so in addition to some of the things I've learned that I hope to share with you here today, perhaps one of the biggest things I've learned over the years is there's always more to learn. So I won't be surprised at all if you guys have some subtleties or some nuances to what is presented today that would expand my knowledge as well as everyone else on the webinar as well. So again, please feel the freedom to add some of those nuggets of wisdom as they come to you throughout the course of the webinar itself. Now, today, guys, lots of things we could have talked about, obviously, when it comes to considerations for physical records management within a warehouse. But we've picked these three. You got to start somewhere, and we'll take a look at these each in detail. So space management, we'll spend a few minutes talking about that, what it is and what are the value propositions or benefits of that. Secondly, when we're done talking about that, we'll move over to reserved shelving versus random shelving, really two paradigms out there in the market, if you will. And then we'll close off the webinar here today, spending a few minutes talking about inventory reconciliation and all the details surrounding that. But before we get into the details, guys, we do have a poll question right up front that we'd like you, and please, we do really covet your response here. How many company-managed records warehouses are currently in use? And guys, as you're taking a moment just to answer this question here, we're really not so much interested in perhaps basement storage areas, that kind of thing, but really where you've got a fully functional warehouse, you know, the kind of thing where you can't just peek your head in the door and see everything, but there's some space to it of significant size. So if you take just a moment and answer this question for us, this will help me throughout the course of the rest of the webinar know a little bit more about who's in attendance today. All right, and give marketing a second here to tabulate the results. Good. So I'm glad to see, of course, that the 0 is a relatively low number. If the answer is 0, guys, and you're not anticipating having a warehouse sometime in the near future, in other words, it's 0 only because right now you're not doing it, but later on you will. If that's the case, you're in the wrong webinar, because the rest of the information we're going to share really is intended for those that either are currently or will be in the near future managing their own warehouse. And then I'm also actually fascinated by the more than 30%. That's actually a little higher than usual. So glad you guys are here with us today. So thank you for taking the time to answer that poll question. That is very helpful to me. All right, so with that, let's get into the meat of the presentation here today, guys. Topic number 1, space management. All right, before I show you a couple more details about this, it really is important to note there are a couple of significant, in fact, crucial prerequisites in order for space management to really have any value for you whatsoever. Number 1, as we just referenced, and for the most part, as was reflected in the poll answers we just got, guys, this feature, which we'll show you the details in just a moment, it really only makes sense if you are managing your own warehouse. If you're one of the organizations that's using an offsite storage vendor, then you know what? The space management concerns and the burden, that is theirs to worry about. It's not for you. So it is sort of an obvious prerequisite. You need to be managing your own warehouse. And then secondly, there is a little bit of math involved that is very important. Now, to assuage any fears that just popped up because I used the word math, I just want to relieve those fears, right? It's not significant math, guys, but in the end, in order for software to effectively leverage space management functionalities, it needs to know 2 things, right? It needs to know the size of the contents, and specifically to space management, what we're really talking about here for contents is boxes. So we need to know the size of each box. And then we also need to know the capacity of the containers. In our examples here today, that is shelves. There are other possibilities for space management, but almost always you're really talking about the scenario of where you're putting boxes on shelves. Now, for those of you who have been in the industry for a while and you're familiar with bankers' boxes and you know all the details about them, they really are containers, or sorry, contents. They are containers as well, but for space management purposes, they are contents. They have a volume of 1.2 cubic feet. So just so you're aware, right, if you had a shelf and that shelf would be able to hold 6 of those boxes, and you like math, right? 6 times 1.2 is 7.2. So you can certainly set up software like Gimel Physical to use those decimals. If you're into decimals, go for it. Define the box sizes as 1.2, define the shelf capacity as 7.2, and do the math, and 6 of those boxes will fit onto that shelf. Having said all that, what most folks choose to do here, guys, is just make the math simple. Because in the end, the numbers really are not that important all by themselves, but only in comparison to each other. That is, we really just want to know the capacity of the shelves relative to the boxes that will be placed upon them. So a couple of prerequisites to be aware of. Now, with all that out of the way, let's take a quick look at what space management is and how you would use it. In the end, guys, there's really 2 main purposes of space management. Purpose number 1 is reflected in the shot we have on the screen right now. It really is just a way to get that 50,000 foot view of how much room do I have left in my warehouse, right? It is important to note, especially for those of you who answered you've got more than one warehouse, You can use the software to manage multiple facilities, each with their own specific shelving schema. So that's not really a concern. In our screenshot here, we're focused on a single one, this Acme warehouse. And as you can see from the little colorized bar at the top, we're a little over 3/4 full. Conversely, a little less than 1/4 of free space remaining. So purpose number one, a quick look at how much room do I have left in this facility. It's an easy extension, guys, to take these numbers. If you come in here regularly to evaluate space management, you could, of course, produce a trend analysis and then be able to predict, when am I going to run out of space in this warehouse? So purpose number one, how much room do I have left? Purpose number two, from a much more practical day-to-day perspective, is what's reflected on your screen right now. Now, a little bit of a busyness to the screen here, so let me take just a couple of moments to describe it to you. What we're really envisioning here, guys, is that regular activity, sometimes even daily, where for those of you managing the warehouse, you are accessioning or you're receiving in numbers of boxes, right? And in particular, for those of you with large warehouses, you face this problem all the time. When I receive boxes, where do I put them? Now, you can certainly take those boxes, put them on a cart, start wheeling that through the warehouse, and just look for open spaces. It will eventually work. You'll eventually hopefully find some open spaces. You can put those boxes wherever you do find those openings. But of course, a lot better way to do this is, wouldn't it be nice to know right up front, right from the loading dock or from your work area, to know where the open spaces are before you begin that adventure? And that's the purpose of the screenshot here, guys. Really, it's as simple as this. Focusing your attention for a moment on this little box that says limit results to, this reflects the number of boxes that are about to come in for which you need to find open spaces. So you simply enter that number there, and in the simplest scenario, you would click on a go button, and then the software does its thing, right? Harkening back to our prerequisites, it's looking through your entire shelving schema, looking at capacities, boxes that are on the shelves, finding where there are open spaces, so that in the example we have here, you can see it found 12 because we're looking for up to 10, and it had to go to that 4th shelf to find that 10th space. So here you go, right? Row 2, unit 9, shelf positions 1, 2, 3, 4. There's where there is some open spaces. So that's the simplest scenario, right? You, of course, can put in any number here whatsoever. You're not limited to 10. It could be 50 or 100, whatever the number happens to be. Couple more important points to note here that folks use with the space management module as well. On top of that very simple scenario, you sometimes have situations, right, where in your warehouse, there's certain things going on in certain rows of the warehouse, right? It could be constructions happening. It could be there's some environmental hazard there, a water leak or what have you. It could be because someone else has said, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Warehouse Manager, can you store my furniture here for a while, right? And you say, I'm a records management warehouse. Okay, I'll do it, but then you need to exclude those problem rows. So you can do what you see here in the screenshot again. You can say, all right, still looking for 10 open spaces, but let's avoid certain portions of the warehouse. In this case, let's avoid row number 1. And so you'll see reflected in the results, we're going to skip over row number 1 and start looking at row number 2. One more quick point to make here, guys, just kind of a nice little feature, right? It's the real world. And the people who are in the warehouse, as well-intentioned as they might be, they're not always going to communicate back to the software what they have done. And so one little nice thing you can do with a space management functionality is this. If you use this little free space, by default, of course, it says, hey, only show me shelves where there's more than 0 free spaces. If you want to, you can actually make that greater than sign a less than sign. And then what you're asking space management to do, you're saying, hey, show me spaces or show me shelves that have more boxes than they should have, right? It's a way for you to identify, I've got something wrong here. The software is telling me there's 7 boxes on that shelf when really I know that it only holds 6. So space management. With that, guys, I want to move you to topic number 2. But before we do, I got a second poll here. So Austin, if you wouldn't mind bringing up that poll question for us here. And guys, here's the gist of it. You see it when you check a box out of the warehouse. Do you reserve its shelf location for return? Or is the space immediately considered as open or free? And guys, while you're thinking this one through and answering, again, appreciate you guys taking the time to respond to this. When we say checkout, it really doesn't matter why, whether it's for circulation purposes or disposition purposes or audit purposes or any other purposes whatsoever. Just when you take a box off of the shelf, what's your intention? Are you going to put that box back on the shelf, or are you eventually going to put it wherever you feel like putting it? Oh, wow. Okay, fascinating. Half and half. So here's an interesting tidbit for you guys. I did mention up front, I've been doing this for a couple of decades now. Now, had I asked this question a couple of decades ago, the shelf space reserved, I can almost guarantee you would have been 90 some percent, if not 100%. Using the shelf space, freeing that shelf space up just was almost unheard of. And we'll talk a little bit why I think that was over the years. But again, appreciate your taking the time to respond here. It does help me as we move forward with where to go next. All right. So with that poll, let's come back now and talk about reserved shelving versus random shelving. All right, reserve shelving, guys, the 57% of you that are using this. Here's what I've learned over the years. And again, I've learned this from clients like you. Number one, it really has been the historically predominant method. Now, my own take on this is partly because the software that you could buy historically, that's just how the software worked, right? So you really had no choice. That's what you were going to use. Sometimes you really weren't even buying software, right? You were using something like Microsoft Excel, or if it was really high tech, maybe you were using Microsoft Access. And where those tools, they have a place, of course, they can house data pretty nicely. What they're not so good at, though, is moving things around, right? Redirecting data, repointing data to other elements. So there's certainly a shortcoming there. Number two, the thought process behind this, let's reserve these spaces, right? A lot of it was based on when I accession in a number of boxes, let's keep them together. That was sort of the thinking behind it, right? And usually that similar word was used really to reflect who it was owned by, which department or division it originated with. So there was this thinking that we're going to keep the boxes together, that we perceive there's value in doing that. Well, the big downside of that, and some of you that have been doing this for a while can attest to this, that actually works pretty well if those boxes are really static and you've got lots of room. So you can kind of have a lot of room to begin with. You don't intend on pulling many of those boxes back out or adding boxes to there or moving them around. Okay, there's a case to be made there, but very often that is not the case, which in turn led to this back shifting issue, right? If you put a bunch of, say, accounting boxes together and you put some IT boxes next to them, and then later on you got more accounting boxes, all of a sudden you can't keep your accounting boxes together. So you got to back shift the IT out of the way, make more room for the accounting. It can just be a real burden. Number three, when you go with the reserved shelving paradigm, it really leads people to say, well, wow, since I'm using reserved shelving, this box is always going to live in this spot. And there's some value to this, right, with this model. You would actually print labels. Those labels on the boxes would have right on the label what shelf they belong on. Now, that's a great idea if those boxes are never going to move. Guys, it kind of goes against one of the rules of thumb, if you will, the best practices concerning label printing, which is do not print onto a label information that will change, right? So concerning boxes specifically, all the time, you see a barcode, both the barcode font and an eye-readable version of that. You'll see the owning organ or the originating organization. You'll often see record schedule or retention series information, and sometimes sort of some generic description of what's inside the box. However, if you're going to print the location on the label and then you wind up moving that box, it really does mean you got to reprint that label. And at volume, that can be a real burden for you to do. Last point I want to make here quickly, guys, is that when you go with this model of reserve shelving, it's really sort of a philosophical point. So I'll let you do with this what you want to. But you're really saying, hey, software, I want you to tell me what to do. That is, you're going to tell me when a box comes back in where I'm going to put it in the shelving system. Now, let's quickly contrast that with random shelving. It's been my experience for sure. In fact, guys, my own data points, again, coming from the vendor perspective, having implemented dozens upon dozens of customers managing their own warehouses, virtually all of them, there's been an exception or two over the decades, but virtually all of them have moved to what I consider a more contemporary model, this random shelving, right? Which really means just put the box wherever you want. All right. So it leverages better functionality in the software. And then you'll see some of the other points here on the slide right in front of us. So you put them wherever you want to, right? What can be a real benefit here? It depends upon your shelving schema, of course. For example, if some of you have installed what's sort of generically known as high bay shelving, the shelving that goes way up in the air, and you're using ladders or lifts or forklifts or other devices to have to go up or down. Well, that's a pain, right? Let's try to avoid that whenever possible. If you can put the boxes wherever is most convenient, then go ahead and do that. You can avoid the bottom shelf, right? So you're not bending over. You can avoid that shelf that's a couple high, so you're stretching to reach those boxes because they're heavy. Let's use the waist high shelving whenever possible. Put the boxes wherever most convenient. Number 3, as we just referenced a moment ago, this enables you when you're not using reserved shelving, but rather random. Simply limit the box label to static information itself. And then sort of a minor point here, number 4, guys, but it may pertain to you. It depends upon your particular situation. It is indeed more secure in that it now requires the uninitiated to use the software to find out where the boxes are, right? Because not all the accounting boxes, they won't all be together now. So it may come into security considerations for you. And then hearkening back to the philosophical discussion, in this case, random shelving, really you are telling the software what you did. You put the boxes wherever you want, and then you tell the software what you just did. Topic number 3 here, guys, inventory reconciliation. So what is it? Number 1, guys, here's the idea. You're taking a portable barcode scanner, you're walking back into a warehouse, and you're scanning some portion of that warehouse. For our example, we'll keep it very simple. You're going to go back and scan shelf number 1. Ideally, and hopefully, you've got barcodes already printed and applied to these shelves to uniquely identify them. And then in our example, let's say you scan the 5 boxes that are on that shelf. So, right, boop, 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 boop. You've done your scans. You take the information in that scanner, and then you feed it back to the software so it can leverage the information that you've just done. Now, why do it, right? What this enables you to do is it lets the software catch up with reality. What do I mean by that? I mean, you may have wonderful people working in your warehouse. They're just upright, church-going, righteous people. But you know what? They're people. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to occasionally get lazy. They're going to move boxes around, and they're going to forget to tell people what they did. This is a way to get the software caught up with mistakes that people have made. And then how often? How often do you want to do this? Guys, tough question here. It really depends. Generally speaking, the more active your records inventory is, whether it's boxes or it could be files in boxes as well, the more often you want to do the reconciliation. The less active, the less often that you want to do. Now, all of that's a little bit abstract. So let's talk about very quickly here, guys, what are the outcomes of an inventory reconciliation? Back to my example, you go back to shelf 1, you scan its barcode, you then scan 5 boxes on that shelf. You feed that information back into the software. It's going to divvy up, or it's going to segregate those scans into 3 buckets. Bucket number 1, let's say the first 4 boxes on that shelf that you scanned. When you feed that back into the software, it says, awesome. I thought those 4 boxes were on that shelf. You just verified they were. Everybody's happy. However, box number 5, wait a minute. I thought box number 5 was down on shelf number 297, but you just told me it's on shelf number 1 via the scanning activity. So it's a bit of a concern. How did that happen? But no harm, no foul, because now I know where it is. This is the software speaking to you, right? It says, okay, I'm going to update the location of that box to shelf number 1 because you just told me indeed where it was. Outcome number three is the yikes, right? This is where, let's say actually that the software thought there was a box number 6 on that shelf, but you did not just scan it. This is where the software says, we have a problem. I thought box 6 was on the shelf. It's not there. I don't know where it is. All I can do for you is mark it as missing and then invite you to go look at the audit trail to try to figure out what happened to that box. So key takeaways, guys, just in summary here: space management, quickly identify those open shelf spaces for incoming boxes. Number 2, reserved versus random shelving. And then number 3, the inventory reconciliation process. Again, guys, I know it was very fast here today, and I'm going to turn things back over to marketing here in just a moment, but I do want to thank you again for spending a few minutes with us. And with that, Shayna, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So Tim showed a couple of screenshots. We have our Gimel physical solution is what he showed you. If you'd like to see a personalized demonstration of that or any of these topics that Tim talked about, please go ahead and click yes on the poll that you'll see pop up on your screen. If not, there is a no, not at this time. I also want to remind everyone to please submit any questions in the Q&A section on the bottom ribbon of your screen. And with that, I will start moving into the Q&A. So Tim, the first one we have here is, how many barcode scans can a barcode scanner hold?
Yeah, great question. It can hold a lot, way more than you'd actually want to do. There is some best practices to kind of cut it off at a certain number. Your typical portable barcode scanner can hold tens of thousands of barcode scans. There's too much danger in either losing that barcode scanner or the battery dying or some other problem happening. So that really won't be a concern. Scan a limited number, upload that information, and then go about the next section of the warehouse.
And the next one is, what is your recommendation on what level we should track boxes? To the row, column, shelf, or position?
Oh man, guys, that's another great question. It depends. Most of the time, you do not, and I'm going to emphasize the word not, want to track to the position level. From a cost benefit analysis, it's just not worth the time, right? Because if you do track to the position level, and position actually gets defined in different ways depending upon how you're shelving your boxes. But right in the real world, people in the warehouse are going back, they're pulling boxes out from behind other boxes, they're shifting boxes to get to that box. And so they're actually moving the positions of the boxes quite often, and then they forget to tell the software what they did. So in this case, the sort of the reasoning of no information is better than bad information. It usually is the case, guys, that if you can just identify down to the specific shelf itself, that is sufficient. There is one big exception to that, and that's for those of you, again, using the high bay shelving. When you're utilizing those lifts, you really do need to know what position the box is in before you kind of start escalating yourself up that lift to go get the box.
Great, and I have a couple more here. Everyone is telling me that paper records are going away. How can I estimate how much capacity I will need 10 years from now?
Yeah, great question. And they are going to go away, but it's not going to be in my lifetime, guys. It's probably not going to be in your lifetime. It may be in your grandkids' lifetime. And this comes back to the space management. I briefly mentioned this, and forgive me for flying through it so quickly. But you can use that either way. You can use space management to figure out how much space do I need if I'm growing in terms of physical records. Conversely, you can measure the decline. If you're opening up more and more free space, you can do the math there, right? And figure out the trend when you're going to be down to a very small number and will no longer need that warehouse.
Great, and the last one I have here, unless another one sneaks in, is the software designed to track just the boxes and not the information within? Is a system for just the warehouse? Is this a system for just the warehouse or for the original owners as well?
No, thank you so much, whoever asked that question. We only focused on the warehouse portion of it. The software works equally well, in fact, in some ways better for the active file management. It is a thin client browser-based application, meaning those out in the field, those end users out in the departments, we really want and encourage them to start tracking their files as active files long before they put them into a box and send them down to the warehouse.
Great. Well, that was the last question, and it kind of timed up perfectly towards the end of the webinar. So if anyone can think of any more questions, both of our email addresses are up there on the screen. Feel free to email either one of us, and we will get back to you with the answer to that question. Additionally, if that's a little hard to remember, you can always email us at info@gimel.com or visit our website at www.gimel.com. For those interested in the recording of this webinar, we will be sending it out between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. So please keep an eye out on your email from us to see the link to the recording. We also hope to see you for our next webinar next week on Thursday. It is a joint webinar with Sapient. Sapient is actually going to be hosting it, so it's not going to be here on Zoom. And the topic is comply with discovery requirements in a post-COVID world. Thank you everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your day.